That was the reality inside a Sherman tank in 1944. No matter what the newsreels said, no matter how many flags waved behind the advance. When the hatch clanged shut and the engine coughed to life, the world outside shrank to a narrow slit of vision, and the world inside became a sealed box of metal, heat, noise, and luck. The Sherman was the backbone of the American armored force. It was fast, reliable, and built in numbers the Germans could never match. On paper, it was a triumph of industry. Inside it, it felt like a wager placed with your own life as the stake. American crews had a nickname for their tanks. Some called them Ronsons because they lit every time. Others simply called them Coffins. The name wasn't melodrama. It was a warning passed from crew to crew like a superstition. The armor was thin. The engine drank gasoline. Ammunition sat too close to flesh. When a shell penetrated, the result was rarely a clean kill. It was fire. It was smoke. It was men clawing for hatches with hands that suddenly didn't belong to them anymore. And yet, 5 men climbed in anyway. The driver was the first to feel the machine. He sat low, hunched forward, hands locked on levers that could steer 30 tons through mud or straight into hell. The bow gunner watched the ground ahead, scanning for infantry with anti-tank weapons who could end a tank with a single shot from a hidden ditch. The loader stood braced with bent knees, ready to wrestle steel shells into the breach as the tank bounced and shook like a living thing. The gunner pressed his face to a sight that turned the world into fragments. Hedge lines, tree trunks, suspicious angles. And above them, the commander floated between worlds. Half inside the turret, half out of the hatch. Because sometimes survival required exposing the one part of the tank the enemy could kill most easily. The man. They weren't strangers, not really. War didn't leave room for strangers for long. The tank forced intimacy. 5 bodies shared the same air. 5 minds had to operate as one. If the driver hesitated, they died. If the loader fumbled, they died. If the gunner blinked at the wrong moment, they died. The tank was steel, but its true engine was trust. Outside, Normandy was a maze of hedgerows, ancient earth walls topped with thick brush, dividing fields into tight squares. For infantry, it was brutal. For tanks, it was worse. A Sherman couldn't see over the hedges. It had to climb them, exposing its belly. And that was when German guns struck. A hidden anti-tank crew could wait in silence, let the first American tank nose over the dirt wall, and put a round into its underside before the crew even knew where the shot came from. The Germans understood ambush. They understood patience. Their Panthers and Tigers could kill at range with guns that hit like judgment. A Tiger's armor shrugged off shells that would have shattered lesser tanks. Its gun could punch through Sherman plate from distances where an American crew couldn't even identify the silhouette that was about to end them. The battlefield favored the hunter who could wait. Sherman crews didn't get to wait. The war demanded motion. So the tank moved forward, tracks grinding, engine roaring, hull shuddering with every crater and root. Inside, the noise was constant, a brutal mechanical scream that made conversation impossible without shouting. Radios crackled with half-heard orders. Metal rang with vibration. Sweat gathered under helmets even in cold weather. The smell of oil and exhaust seeped into skin and stayed there. The first time the enemy fired, everyone learned the difference between fear and panic. Fear was constant, a pressure behind the ribs. Panic arrived like a flash of lightning. A shell struck the armor with a sound that wasn't just loud, it was physical. The impact felt like being hit by a hammer inside a bell. Sometimes the armor held, and the crew exhaled as if they'd been underwater. Sometimes it didn't. Then the compartment filled with smoke. The air turned bitter, and everything became hands and shouting, and the desperate search for daylight. In those seconds, training competed with instinct. Men had drilled for bailouts. They had rehearsed finding hatches blind. But no rehearsal could simulate the heat of a burning tank, the way oxygen vanished, the way vision narrowed, the way time fractured into fragments. Latch, shove, climb, breathe. If they escaped, they didn't feel victorious. They felt shocked. Then they climbed into another Sherman, because there was always another tank, and the line still had to move. What kept crews fighting was not heroism the way stories sell it. It was a simpler chain: responsibility, loyalty, and momentum. The infantry needed armor support. The commanders needed ground taken by nightfall. The man beside you needed you to do your job without hesitation. In a tank, courage wasn't a speech. It was pulling the lever again, loading the shell again, traversing left again. Some crews discovered a truth that manuals did not advertise. The Sherman's weakness could be twisted into a weapon. If you couldn't win at range, you erased the range. If the enemy's strength was patience, you replaced patience with chaos. A fast turret, a quick engine, a fearless commander, those could break the enemy's rhythm. The tactic was terrifying in its simplicity. Move hard, move fast, hit first, never stop. It worked, at least for a while. A Sherman bursting through a hedge line at speed wasn't what German gunners expected. A tank firing on the move didn't fit the mental model of a cautious opponent. That surprise bought seconds, and seconds were everything. The enemy hesitated, recalculated, and in that hesitation, the gunner's crosshairs found a track, a side plate, a weak seam. A tiger that had seemed invincible could become a smoking monument if it lost mobility and exposed its flank. But war never lets you keep a secret for long. Each successful charge left evidence: wrecked vehicles, burned hedges, prisoners with stories, German commanders marking maps and asking why entire sectors collapsed where one Sherman appeared. The enemy adapted. Ambushes tightened. Fields became kill zones. The hedgerows that once hid the Germans now hid traps designed for aggressive crews who could not resist forward motion. And the men inside the steel coffin were paying a cost that didn't show on casualty reports. Fatigue warped judgment. Drivers began to see shapes and shadows that weren't there. Gunners stared so long through optics that the world outside the sight looked wrong. Loaders' hands cracked and bled, then kept moving. Men stopped sleeping in full nights. They dozed in fragments, waking at any sound, hearts already sprinting. Inside the tank, silence could be worse than explosions. Silence meant you were waiting for the next shot. Silence meant you had time to imagine what fire would feel like. Then, one day, the luck ran out. Not with drama, not with music, but with an ambush that had been waiting longer than they had. A turn in the road. A narrow gap between buildings or hedges. The commander scanning high, the driver accelerating to clear the open space. A German gun already dialed in on that exact intersection, barrel steady, crew calm. The shot arrived first. There is a moment after impact when the crew's minds refuse to understand what their bodies already know. The tank jolts, steel screams, smoke blooms. A man is thrown against the turret wall. Another loses his grip and doesn't know where his hands are. The engine either dies or howls like an injured animal. Someone shouts a name that doesn't answer. In that moment, the steel coffin becomes literal. If the hatches open, men spill out gasping, blinking, bleeding, alive by inches. If they don't, the tank becomes a sealed furnace, and the war moves on without pause. That is the truth armored veterans carried home. Not the speeches, not the medals. The truth that survival often had nothing to do with skill and everything to do with the angle of a shell, the softness of soil, the mercy of timing. History likes clean narratives. It prefers machines, specifications, and strategies that can be summarized in a paragraph. But war is lived in cramped spaces where 5 men breathe the same air and trust each other more than they trust God. It is lived in seconds where bravery looks exactly like doing your job one more time. A steel coffin, 5 men, and no way out, except forward. And even when the war ended, some part of them never stopped listening for the next impact.